Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Or welcome if you're new, because I see a lot of new subscribers since the last time that I uploaded. And I wanted to say thank you, and I appreciate that you care about what's going on my little channel. My name is Anna, and I talk about history, writing, books, and I hope to expand upon that in the future when I have more time to dedicate to YouTube, which I'm trying to make more time for it. I've invested in some somewhat better gear since last time, still working on audio. I think I'll have that better for like video essays in the future. For this one, you'll notice that the audio changes because I film in multiple locations. But I'm just trying some stuff out, getting a little experimental, trying to break from the standard just sitting here and talking, trying to make it more interesting. I would like to, in the future, talk about fairy tales, folklore, because I want that to be a really big part of this channel, because if you haven't noticed, they're really trending right now too. Side note, I guess, but I want to talk about fairy tales. I want to talk about films that have to do with history in particular, or even fantasy or folklore. I would like to also talk about the research that I did for my master's dissertation, because I'm not going to do anything else with that in terms of like the paper that it ended up being. So why not share it with all of you guys who are obviously at least somewhat interested in history? So I have plans, and I'm trying to dedicate more time to this channel, which is why I really appreciate all the engagement I've been getting, even though it's like, relatively speaking, compared to other YouTubers, not that much, but to me, it's a lot. And so thank you again for all the new subscribers. If you do like this kind of content and you're not subscribed to me, consider it. You know the drill. It's kind of like a voicemail at this point, where the more engagement I get and more of a following I get on this channel, the less I have to deal with like other streams of income, and I have more time and more resources to dedicate to this, which I really enjoy and I think it's fun. So that's all the news on the channel front and how I plan to move forward with things. Now for this video, I realized it's been about a year since I did my last book video, and I thought, why not do another one? It's December, we're wrapping up our goals, we're preparing for the new year, so I thought I'd go through every book that I read in 2021. And my goal was 50, definitely not going to make that. I'm still trying to wrap up a bit of reading, which you'll see at the end of the video. But yeah, so the structure of this, I go through it chronologically. And I also give a rating for all the books that I read, because I think it's a good indicator of how much I enjoyed it. And I try to give a reason for my ratings, so it's not just arbitrary. So, that being said, this video is probably actively boycotting the TikTok attention span. So if you or someone you know has been afflicted by the TikTok attention span, pro tip, you can watch this video on 1.5 speed to get through it faster. And without further ado, let's get into it. I'm utilizing my phone because I have the Goodreads app on here, and I can see everything that I've read this year and also my ratings. This video is not sponsored by Goodreads, but hey Goodreads, if you want to, I won't say no, because this is something I actually recommend to people anyway, and I think it's a really useful tool. So let's get going. Number one is not a book that I actually started this year. I started it technically December last year, but I finished it this year, and it is The Scar by China Miéville, who is quickly becoming my favorite author. And this book is a fantasy book. It's number 2 installment in his trilogy that takes place in a world that features a city that's kind of like London called New Crobuzon. And I loved Perdido Street Station. I'm pretty sure that's my favorite book. This is the second installment, but it's not really a sequel to that book. So this one's about floating pirate city, to keep it short and sweet. It's excellent. I rated it 5 stars on Goodreads because I loved it, and I can't stop thinking about it. Number 2 is Midnight Sun by Stephenie Meyer. And I gotta say, I am just kind of over Twilight. I was obsessed when I was a teenager, and I can see how if you're on Team Edward, you would be really excited for this book to come out finally. And I'm glad for Stephenie Meyer that she did finally put out this work, because there was all that weird stuff, like initially some of it got leaked and all that. So I'm glad that she actually did publish it eventually, for some closure there. But I'm just like not into it. I was never really interested in Edward anyway, but I also just don't think that realistically a vampire of his age would be so pure and innocent in the way that he thinks. Like, he's presented in this very gentlemanly, almost chivalric way in the book from Bella's perspective. But I just don't buy that he would be that way internally. People are more nuanced than that, and come on, he is a vampire. At the end of the day, he is a vampire. And I just couldn't get behind his whole... It just felt so much like it was his mind, his thoughts were being censored by the author, because who the author is. And I don't like when there's too much of that breaking of the fourth wall sort of thing going on. Anyway, 3 out of 5 stars. I wasn't really into it, because it just didn't seem realistic within the world of Twilight. Next, I read a book that was gifted to me for Christmas last year, and it's called Tolkien Treasures, and it is kind of a visual overview of Tolkien's work. So it included a lot of his illustrations and different bits of information about him, and it was really pretty, and I still have it. I just don't have it with me here. That one was a 5-star read, especially if you're interested in Tolkien. Next up, I read a book for the last bits of my dissertation, and it's called Language in Pictland by Catherine Forsyth. I don't think that this book is accessible if you're not like a member of an academic body or in school and have access to all that type of stuff, because it's just not readily available, because it's a super niche topic. But it is what it says. It's all about the language of the Picts, which we know very little of. So Forsyth really goes into all of the detail there, and I appreciated it because I only really needed to reference little bits of language stuff in my dissertation, but it was great. I thought it was an excellent read, not too dense, very informative, 5 stars. Next is Worlds of Arthur by Guy Halsall, which is another book that I read for my dissertation. Hi, it's future me. I realized while I was editing that I mixed up what I was saying about 2 books, so I brought up my Goodreads review of Worlds of Arthur so I could refresh my memory of what I actually thought of the book. Basically, my takeaway was that it was a good in-depth look at the Arthurian context in Britain. It would help, though, if you've had some familiarity with certain primary sources like Bede, Geoffrey of Monmouth, Nennius, or the work attributed to Nennius, The History of the Britons, that kind of thing, because it is kind of, it references a lot of those kind of primary sources, so I can imagine that if you have no familiarity with those sources, you might find it a bit overwhelming. I, however, liked it because I read pretty much all the sources that were referenced, so everything kind of made sense to me. Overall, I gave it a 4 out of 5 star rating. Next up is The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany, and I don't know how I never heard of this before, but my friend recommended it to me, and it is a beautiful story, very romantic fantasy, I would say. Not in the romance, like, ooh, kind of way, but like romantic as in like romanticism, and it's lovely. I rated it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's got unicorns, so basically I'm down. Next is another book I read for finishing up my dissertation. It's called King Arthur, The Making of the Legend by Nicholas Higham, and I read a few of his articles on different topics for my dissertation as well, so he is a reputable source. I just didn't like this book that much. I've also brought up my review on Goodreads for King Arthur, The Making of the Legend, because I obviously forgot why I didn't like this book as much, so I have it here in front of me to remind myself. I said in my review, I wouldn't really call this an enjoyable read. I'm not in the camp of believers in a true historical Arthur, but this book seemed like the most long-winded way to say Arthur was 100% fictitious. It didn't need to be 300-plus pages long to make that argument. Higham could have gone over all the sources and disputed them in a far more concise way. If you want a detailed dissection of nearly every Arthurian source and why they're untrustworthy, then maybe you'd like this. I, however, did not, so I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read The Silmarillion finally. This is a history book, and I think going into that with that mindset really helps. This is the history of Middle-earth. It will take another read for me to really understand everything, but I enjoyed it. I think it is dense, so therefore I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, but I will definitely go back and read it again in the future. Then I read Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. This was gifted to me by my friend who is very much into Harry Potter, and I had never read them. So I read it for the first time this year. And I probably would have loved it as a kid. I just was too busy reading horse stories and unicorn stories and that kind of thing. But I rated this one 5 stars. I think it's great. It's really cozy. It's really good. I don't think I'm going to become a Potterhead or anything like that, but I really enjoyed it. Next up, I decided to read some history of my own country for a change. This is about Sitting Bull. It's called The Lance and the Shield, and it was very good. I really enjoyed this as an overview of his life. I think, at least for me personally, the best way that I learn about history is through reading about people. Not just events and battles and dates and all that. That can get a bit boring for me, but learning about the people is the best for me. So now I definitely want to read some about Crazy Horse and among other Native American figures that were very important in history. I found the writing to be a little bit awkward in places, which is why I gave it a 4 out of 5 star rating. Next, I read Sabriel by Garth Nix. This is a young adult fantasy book. It's the first in a series. Follows a teenage girl who heads north of the Wall in her country to find her father who's gone missing. And he had the ability to talk, well, not just talk, fight the dead and protect the realm, kind of a thing. And so she's inherited that ability. This is a simplification of the plot, but that's basically it. I enjoyed it. In places, the writing was a little bit clunky. Some of the descriptions were kind of hard to wrap my brain around. Overall, decent, but I probably won't finish the series just because I'm not super into YA anymore, seeing as I'm just an A. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. Next up, I read Everything's Fine by Matthew Pridham, who is somebody that I know personally. He was an instructor of mine when I was an undergrad. And this is a very short, sweet, to the point story. It gave me American Psycho, Nikolai Gogol, and Wallace and Gromit vibes, and therefore I very much enjoyed it. And it's not expensive on Amazon, so it's worth a read, and 5 out of 5 stars. What else can you say? Next up, I read Eastern Coyote by Jerry Parker. Yes, I say coyote, not coyote, because I'm from redneck Colorado. This is one that I fished off of my dad's bookshelf. I don't believe this is readily available. It was published in the 90s. It's kind of a niche thing anyway. This is basically the research of this guy, Jerry Parker, about the Eastern Coyote and what makes it unique to its Western counterparts or wolves or dogs or anything like that. So because I'm really interested in wildlife and biology, I picked this one up and I enjoyed it. It is dense in terms of the science, but it's a good read if you're interested and can find it. 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read a book that probably everyone's heard about, maybe not. The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. This is a good read for all ages. It is not, strictly speaking, a children's book. The illustrations are stunning. The message is good, like solid and good. I mean that in like a wholesome kind of way. I don't usually buy hardcovers, but this one had to join my like actual collection, not just books I read and then give to somebody else. This one's gonna stay in my collection for years to come. 5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. This is not light reading. I've been wanting to read this for years, and then it was recommended to me by a close friend. If you liked Dracula, you will like this book, for sure, because it's about Dracula. It's sort of a thought experiment about what if Dracula still lived, and it holds true to the Bram Stoker tradition of stories within stories, letters, and a group that's like trying to hunt down Dracula, and how he's sort of shrouded in mystery throughout the whole thing. I personally did not enjoy Bram Stoker's Dracula, so therefore this one was a bit difficult for me to get through. I love the mythos of Dracula and everything, but that's a whole discussion for another day. But Dracula the book was not really my cup of tea. And therefore this one was not really my cup of tea either, although I do very much respect the author for creating something that fits so well as like a companion novel almost to Dracula itself. 4 out of 5 stars. Next up we have Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is one that I have been wanting to pick up because I'm a big medieval nerd. I'm not super into medieval poetry. The only medieval poem, if you can really call it medieval, that I like is Beowulf. So far. I mean, I've read other stuff, and they can be very good sources for understanding the time period and the culture in which they were written, so that's cool. Anyway, pretty good timing. I read this before I saw the film. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because I'm still a bit unsure, and it takes something pretty flawless for me to give it 5 stars. Next, I read The Constitution of the United States plus the Declaration of Independence. Every American needs to read this book, this text. Full stop. Like, I can't believe that this is not required reading in schools. It boggles my mind because it is our country. Like, this is our country right here. At least, like, the foundation of it. And I think that everyone needs to know about that. Not every country has a written constitution, so this is somewhat of a unique document. Additionally, it's extremely relevant to things that are going on today. Every American needs to read this book. 5 out of 5 stars, obviously. Okay, next up is one that I don't have with me anymore because I gave it to a friend. It's Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. I love that movie, and for some reason it's taken me this long to actually read the source material, the book itself. And I gotta say, I was disappointed. It didn't have the same magic that the movie had, unfortunately, for me. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I'm sorry. I really thought it was going to be a little bit more something. I can't quite put my finger on it. The two types of witch things, like witch books I like, witchy books, are like the super dark ones or the really cozy ones. And Practical Magic didn't really hit either of those marks for me. So I don't think I'm going to read the rest of the series. Next is Successful Self-Publishing by Joanna Penn. This is not a good book. I'm sorry, Joanna. I am. But all this book did for me was make me realize I don't want to self-publish, at least not for my first one, because yes, it is informative about the steps you can take to self-publish, but I don't like books that look like Word documents. I just don't think it looks professional. And I work in a bookstore and I see a few of these on the shelves and they don't sell. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I did learn a little bit, but mostly I learned that, oh God, I do not want to self-publish. So I don't recommend it. If you're self-published and that's your thing, I'm totally not hating on the art of self-publishing because there is some finesse that it takes. I just don't think that this book was helpful. The next book I read, I also don't have a copy of it on me because I gave it to a friend. You can see a trend here. It's The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. And that's a horror book. It's a Native American group of men and basically a revenge story, and that's all I'll say. But it was a good read. It took some time to get into the flow of how he writes, so therefore I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, but I think some people will really, really like this book. The next one I read is The Library of the Dead by T.L. Huchu. And this book, I think anybody who liked Harry Potter will like this book, even though it really doesn't have anything in common with Harry Potter, except sort of Edinburgh. So you can see why I picked it up, because it's set in Edinburgh, and it follows a 14-year-old girl who can deliver messages from the dead to their living relatives. So I enjoyed this book quite a lot. I thought it was pretty unique from anything I've read before. It is a fantasy book, technically, but it doesn't read like your standard fantasy. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. It came out this year, too. The next book I read is Born by Jeff Vandermeer. And this might be the best book I read this year. I'll decide at the end of the video. But this is by far the weirdest book I have ever read in my entire life, and I loved it. I'm usually not a sci-fi person. This is sci-fi, and it is so bizarre. It's post-apocalyptic sci-fi. There's a creature in it that is simultaneously terrifying and cute, and it follows a group of survivors after a post-apocalyptic event. And that's really all I can say about this, because it's so weird that you just have to read it for yourself. It is 5 out of 5 stars for sure. So good. So the next one I read is called 15 Rabbits by Felix Salten. And this one came out before Watership Down, but it is very much like Watership Down. So it follows a group of young rabbits for a whole year. And that's really all that can be said. I enjoyed it, but I did think that there were some things that could have been a little bit better. I loved Watership Down, like 5 out of 5 stars for Watership Down. This one, 3 out of 5. The next book I read is called Boy Snow Bird, and this is a Snow White adaptation told in the 1950s. If that sounds like your kind of thing, I would pick it up. If you liked Toni Morrison, pick it up, because it is very in that wheelhouse of Toni Morrison's style. Not personally my cup of tea. I do like fairy tale adaptations, but this one kind of missed the mark for me personally, and therefore I rated it 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read a very cute children's book called Margaret's Unicorn. I had to pick this up because it's so obviously Scottish. She's wearing a Fair Isle sweater, tartan skirt, wellies it looks like almost. There's heather, there's a unicorn. It's really cute. It's about a little girl who discovers a baby unicorn and raises it for a year, roughly, and then gives it back to the wild, and then the unicorn grows up and remembers her, and it's super cute. So I rated that one 5 stars. Continuing on the kids' book trend theme that I had is this one called Strega Nona, which is one that I read as a kid, and I always thought I imagined, because I could never remember what it was. I just remembered it was the pasta one. So Strega Nona, she's like the witch in this little Italian village, and the pasta quite literally does take over the town. It's excellent. Recommend it to everybody. 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Civil War Land in Bad Decline by George Saunders, because it was gifted to me by a huge George Saunders fan. And I, for some reason, haven't really gotten into short stories, but I do like that format. So this was fun to read, extremely cynical, but I did enjoy it. Will it make me pick up more George Saunders? I don't know, maybe. What did I rate this one? This one got 4 out of 5 stars, so I must have liked it. The next one I read looks like it was The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix, which I don't have a copy of, but it came out this year, and it was about a support group for the last victims of serial killers. So they all have like this therapy session that they go to, and then one of them is super paranoid, and it follows her mainly. So it was interesting and very different, and I rated it 4 out of 5 stars. Then I read The Secret Garden, which is a movie that I grew up on, the 90s one. It's so good. It's so good. And I don't know why, but I had never read the book. So I finally picked up the book, and I really liked it. It's very similar to the movie. The only thing I didn't like was that about halfway through, it stops being Mary Lennox's story and starts being Colin's story. And I just think that that's unfortunate, because Mary was such an interesting character, and then like halfway through the book it switches to being all about Colin, and I didn't like that. But overall it is a very good cozy read. And what did I rate it? 4 out of 5 stars, because of that aforementioned issue. I don't like when they change focuses in the middle of the book. Then the next book I read is a contender for one of the best ones I read this year, called Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConnie. And it's sort of a thought experiment about what if wolves were reintroduced to the Scottish Highlands, and it follows the wildlife biologist that's like the spearhead of the movement, and then there's a murder or an attack, some mysterious death, and they don't know if it was a wolf that did it or a person, and it's this whole unraveling of that. And it was so good that I read it in 2 sittings. I read the latter 200 pages in a day. It was amazing, so 5 out of 5 stars. And then I read another kid's book called Snow and Rose, which is an adaptation of the fairy tale Snow White and Rose Red, which is, I think, a lesser-known fairy tale, and it's a good one. And this is beautifully illustrated, and it's so wonderfully told. I love this book. I was not really planning to buy it, but it's so beautiful that I was like, yeah, this is gonna be a keeper. I think I rated this one 5 out of 5 stars, yes. Very good read for not just kids. Oh, okay, and then next I read Slewfoot, A Tale of Bewitchery by Brom. This satisfied all of my Salem-esque witch trials needs. You know, there's a headstrong woman, there's a monster in the woods, and a really satisfying ending. And that one came out this year too, and it was very good. I loved it. I will be picking up more of Brom's stuff, which you'll see a bit later in the video. 5 out of 5 stars. Okay, then I read Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor? Sorry, don't know how to pronounce it. This is a translation from Spanish, because I don't read Spanish. But I am looking at my Goodreads right now, and I did not rate this one because I didn't know what to rate it. I did not enjoy reading this book in the slightest. It was a very, very dark portrait of the worst types of humanity. And I like dark fiction, I like dark fantasy, I like when things get really gritty, but this just made me feel icky to read. And I think that was part of the point of it. I also think that there are some things that are lost in translation, so I bet reading this in Spanish would have been a lot better. So I still don't know what to rate this. For my personal enjoyment of it, I would say a 2 out of 5, but I can leave room for it to be rated much higher by somebody else, because I can see how people would really find this powerful as a text, and I understand why it won awards, but yeah, I didn't really like it. Then it looks like I read a lot of books that I don't have copies of because they were borrowed or I gave them away. Looks like the next one was The Fox's Tower and Other Tales by Yoon Ha Lee, which was another collection of short stories. Very magical, different from other stuff I had read. Very, very short stories too. But I really liked it. I got an advanced reader copy because of my job. And there are children. Could you not exist, please?
So I rated The Fox's Tower 4 stars, just because I personally like short stories to be a little bit longer. Because it was more like a book of fairy tales, and I liked that format a lot. But I just wish they were a little bit longer, because it was like as soon as I got invested, it was over. And I know for some people, they really like that. For me, I like a little bit more length. So, but I did enjoy it. Then I read Carrie, Stephen King's first novel, and it's the first Stephen King text that I've ever read. And I think I kind of resisted reading his stuff because I didn't want to be too influenced by him, because I know that he's like the quintessential horror writer, and I like writing stuff that's darker, not necessarily horror in and of itself. I don't know, it's kind of an irrational fear that I would get too influenced by him. But I really enjoyed it. It was very easy to read. I probably don't need to talk up Stephen King at all because, you know, he's one of the most well-known writers ever. So, yeah, 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig because everyone's been talking about it. My best friend was like, you have to read this book. So finally, yes, I read it, and it was good, and I liked the format. I don't think I'll really go into what it's about, just because it's an experience to just read it. I didn't know what it was about going into it, and I'm glad I went in blind. So if you don't know what it's about and you've been wanting to pick it up, or you just want to read something a little bit different, I recommend it. I rated it 5 out of 5 stars because I could not see anything wrong with it. It had a good message, the format was cool, the concept was really interesting. Oh, and then I read the worst book that I read this year, and I don't even really want to go into this. It's Sea of the Patchwork Cats by Carlton Mellick III. And I rated this 1 star because I had to give it a rating. I suppose I didn't have to give it a rating. I could have just not given any stars. This is a very bizarre book, totally not worth reading. I kind of wish I hadn't read it. A coworker of mine loaned it to me as a joke when I was over for a party and drinks had been had and he was fishing around on his bookshelves for the weirdest stuff that he had. So I read it only because of the reading challenge goal that I set for myself this year, so there's that. Let's move on, please. Then I read Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets because I enjoyed the first one so much, and I do want to read the whole series at some point. Excuse you, dog. And not much to say about that. Harry Potter's popular for a reason. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars because I thought it was good. I really liked it. It's a cozy read. And then I read the graphic novel Pretty Deadly, Volume 1, which was loaned to me by a coworker. I haven't read very many graphic novels, so I will kind of accept any recommendations. This one I really liked. The art is cool and dark and creepy, and there's a dog barking! Stop! There's a dog barking, so I'm gonna wrap this one up. I enjoyed this. I'm currently reading Volume 2, which I'll get into in a second for what I'm currently reading. I believe I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I would be surprised if I didn't. Yes, I did. 5 out of 5 stars. Well, we've come to the end of everything that I have read as of December 12th, but I wanted to share with you some of my what I'm reading currently, and some other stuff. First of all, I am finishing up the Pretty Deadly, Volume 2. I'm almost done with that, so that won't take me too much longer. I'm also reading The Nutcracker by Alexandre Dumas, and I didn't know that this was a book or a story or anything before the ballet, but that makes perfect sense. I love the ballet, so obviously I had to read the book. This one, I'm hoping I'll finish this by Christmas. It's tiny. I'm also reading Queens of the Conquest, England's Medieval Queens, Book 1 by Alison Weir. And this one, I'm very much enjoying this. It is a bit awkward and somewhat amateurish. Like, you can tell she's not strictly speaking a historian, just somebody who's interested in history. But I think that the material itself is very interesting, and I very much respect that about this, let's see, like the latter quarter of the book, this is all the appendices, footnotes, further reading. I respect that. This one I'm hoping to be able to finish by the end of the month, but it's a bit slow going because I'm focused on other things right now, but I am enjoying this. There's a book 2 about Queens of the Crusades. I'm definitely going to pick that up next year. So hopefully that'll be done in 2021. I'm also going to really try hard to read The Memory Police. I'm overzealous most of the time with reading goals, but I'm going to try really hard to get through Krampus, the Yule Lord by Brom, same author as Slewfoot, because it's got to be a Christmassy read. I'm going to try so hard to get through this. I would also really love to read Snow Glass Apples by Neil Gaiman and Colleen Doran, because it looks beautiful and it's skinny, and I'm pretty sure I can get this done. So that's about it. Yeah, I am definitely going to be pushing it to get these guys read in the next, like, 2.5 weeks. But I'm going to try. I'm really going to try, because my reading goal this year was 50 books. I'm just about at 40, so I'm not going to make my goal for sure. But that's okay. I like challenging myself, and that's what's been so fun. And that's one of the reasons I really like reading, because I have such a long to-read list that I gotta get crack-a-lackin'. Gotta challenge myself. If I give myself a reading goal that's a little bit too hard to make, then I'm still gonna read a lot, and I have read a lot this year, so yeah. Now we come to the actual end of the video, where I reveal the best book that I read this year. So drum roll, I guess, but it's Born by Jeff Vandermeer. I loved reading this book. Every moment was enjoyable, which I can't say for every book. I can't stop recommending it to people. I can't stop thinking about it. So obviously it was 5 stars, but it ended up being the best book of 2021 for me. So I definitely recommend it for a variety of people, whether you like fantasy, sci-fi, dark fiction, what have you. I think it's a really good read, obviously. So thank you for watching this whole gargantuan video, and thank you again to all the new subscribers. Comment below if you've read any of the books that I mentioned in this video. I'd love to hear what you thought, especially if it's different opinions from mine. Yeah, so hopefully it won't be 6 months until my next video. I'm really going to try to make it happen more frequently so that I can get out my ideas, you guys can find some use from this, or at least be entertained. So that's all for this video. Happy holidays, happy winter, and until next time. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name's Anna, and I am awkward on camera. Okay.